hotel room that doesn't exist. You know how road trips are supposed to be fun, freeing, a way to escape from life's stress and connect with the open road. That's what I thought when I set off for Arizona on my way to Sedona. But this story isn't about beautiful sunsets or scenic drives. This story is about a night I'll never forget, a night in a hotel room that shouldn't exist. To this day, I can't explain what happened in Holbrook, Arizona. But if you ever find yourself on I-40 heading west, do yourself a favor, keep driving. It was late, probably around 10:30 p.m. I'd been driving all day, my eyes gritty from the glare of the sun, my body aching from sitting behind the wheel for hours. If you've ever driven through Arizona, you know how empty the roads can feel at night. It's just you, the road, and the endless stretch of desert. I was exhausted, and when I saw the lights of a small town in the distance, I felt relief wash over me. The town was called Holbrook, a quiet little place that felt like it hadn't changed much since the 1950s. There were a couple of gas stations, a diner, and a handful of motels. I didn't need anything fancy, just a bed and a few hours of sleep. I pulled into the parking lot of a small hotel, nothing remarkable. It had that old Route 66 vibe with a flickering neon sign that read vacancy. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a couple of cars that looked like they hadn't moved in weeks. The lobby was small and dimly lit. Behind the front desk sat a tired-looking receptionist, a woman in her 50s with a name tag that read Linda. She barely looked up from her crossword puzzle as I walked in. "Need a room for the night," I said, trying not to sound as drained as I felt. She slid a key across the counter without a word. The tag on it read room 214. "Top floor," she mumbled, not even looking at me. I didn't think much of it at the time, just figured she was tired too. But looking back, there was something in the way she avoided eye contact, something off. I climbed the creaky stairs to the top floor, dragging my overnight bag behind me. The hallway was long and narrow, with faded carpet that smelled faintly of mildew. The walls were a dull yellow, stained with time and who knows what else. When I found room 214, I hesitated. The door looked older than the others, like it hadn't been touched in years. Paint was chipped and the brass numbers were tarnished. I told myself I was just being paranoid, travel fatigue playing tricks on my mind. The lock clicked open and I stepped inside. Immediately, I felt it. Something was wrong. The air was heavy, stale, like the room hadn't been aired out in years. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the room. The bedspread was an ugly floral print, faded and frayed at the edges. But the thing that stood out most was the old radio sitting on the dresser. It was one of those vintage models from the 1940s, the kind with big dials and a wooden frame. It was on, crackling with static. I walked over to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't budge. No matter how hard I tried, it just kept playing that low, hissing static. Great, I muttered to myself, figuring the place was just old and poorly maintained. I threw my bag on the bed, kicked off my shoes, and decided to tough it out. Must have fallen asleep pretty quickly because the next thing I remember is waking up to a strange sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was faint at first, like something or someone was dragging their nails against the wall next to my bed. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I reached for the lamp on the nightstand and turned it on. The room was empty, but when I touched the wall where I'd heard the scratching, it was warm, warmer than it should have been. I sat there for a while, trying to convince myself it was nothing, maybe an old pipe or a mouse in the walls. Eventually, I turned off the light and lay back down, determined to get some rest. That's when I heard the whispers. They were faint, almost too faint to make out, but they were definitely there. Voices right outside my door, murmuring things I couldn't understand. I sat up, every nerve in my body on edge. I stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open, but it didn't. The whispers faded and the room fell silent again. When the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I was already dressed and ready to leave. I hadn't slept a wink after the whispers started. Just sat in that uncomfortable chair by the window, waiting for morning. As I handed the key back to the receptionist, I decided to mention it. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, weird question. "But is there something unusual about room 214? She froze, her hand hovering over the counter. Slowly, she looked up at me, her face pale. What did you just say, room 214? I repeated. The one you gave me last night. Something felt off. Her eyes widened and she shook her head. That's not possible, she said. We haven't rented out room 214 in years. What do you mean? I asked, my stomach tightening. It was damaged in a fire, completely gutted. We had to lock it up. There's no way you stayed in that room. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I didn't argue. I didn't ask any more questions. I just left. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started looking up old news articles about the hotel. Sure enough, I found one from 1983. Fire in Holbrook Hotel leaves one dead. The fire had started in room 214. The man staying there had fallen asleep with a lit cigarette. Article mentioned that he died in the fire, trapped in the room as the flames spread. I don't know how to explain what happened that night. How did I get a key to a room that was supposed to be locked? How did I hear voices and scratching in a place that had been abandoned for decades? I haven't been back to Holbrook since, and I don't plan to. But if you ever find yourself on a road trip to Arizona, and you see a small hotel with a flickering neon sign, think twice before you stop. Because sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. Have you ever experienced something you can't explain? A hotel stay that left you with more questions than answers? Share your story in the comments below. You never know, it might be featured in a future video. Don't forget to subscribe for more real horror stories. New videos every week featuring the scariest tales from Reddit and beyond.